Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the Kayak Conference for 2022. Our first presentation of the day is Beyond Bilingual, making Storytime friendly to families who are English language learners. And the presenters from the Brooklyn Public Library will introduce themselves.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Payne, and I coordinate early childhood services at the library, and we're delighted you could join us again. The session is Beyond Bilingual, making Storytime friendly to families who are English language learners, and we're happy to share some of our lessons learned in Brooklyn with you all. And I'm just delighted to be presenting with you. I was born in Louisville, so it's fun to be presenting for you. I'm going to turn it over and let Eva and Jessica introduce themselves. Eva.
Good morning. My name is Eva Rezan. I'm the Director of Outreach Services at Brooklyn Public Library, and which includes our immigrant services, services for people experiencing homelessness, a whole array of more inclusive services to reach folks who might need an extra invitation to the library. I'll hand it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Eva. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Rowley, and I'm the coordinator of early literacy programs at Brooklyn Public Library. I'm really delighted to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics. And I also have a connection to Louisville. My great aunt lives there, and she is 101 years old. So I'm hoping to be able to visit her very soon. So yeah, we're going to get started.
So to get started, I know you have many languages spoken across Kentucky. I know we modeled our New Americans Corners for Citizen after Louisville Public Library's New Americans Initiative. But if you could pop into the chat, what are some of the languages spoken in your community? Mary was quick. Spanish, Swahili, Arabic, Nepali, Dutch. Spanish. Dutch and Spanish. Interesting. So one of the best ways to find languages spoken in your community, other than the people who come into your library, is looking at the American Community Survey. But often we are some of the first people to notice when newcomers come. People find the library as a good resource. A lot of what we were doing when we started this project was about being more welcoming to immigrant communities in Brooklyn. And a lot of the different resources we're going to share today will work across different languages. They're about being inclusive regardless of the languages that people speak. You can, next slide. This is Tatiana, who works in the youth wing at our central library. And if you click on the QR code, if you're on a computer, you can see a video of Tatiana explaining in Russian how to get a library card. If you're able to see the video, I recommend showing it to staff in the future or taking a look at it. For today, we're just going to talk about what helps you understand people who speak another language. So think about how you feel when someone has given you instructions in another language and what helped you understand them better. You can put your answers in the chat. Well, while you're thinking about that, body language and facial expressions. Definitely. Pantomiming. Yeah, so using your hands, almost like charades. Yes. tone of voice, having a warm tone of voice. I would be remiss if I also didn't mention volume. It's good to have a warm tone of voice and slow down the speed of your speech, but you don't want to talk louder. Using language apps has helped, definitely, like using Google Translate and having them type out what they need by writing it down. Great. Those are great ideas. So I just want you to hold that in your mind as we move through this presentation, sort of putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who may not speak English, and what would make them feel welcome and included in a library program.
Eva, I think you've muted yourself, or there's a problem with your audio.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the agenda for today, we're going to talk broadly about multilingual programming, English language learners, and implications for early literacy program in the library. We're also going to tell you about what we did at BPL, give you some tips for multilingual and ELL inclusive story times, and then also share some of the principles that help guide our work in this area across different programming. We'll have some time at the end to ask questions, but feel free to pop questions into the chat as we go. And we'll maybe do a song at the end. Thank you.
All right, wait, oh, I think there's more than one of us doing the slides. All right, sorry about that. We will figure this out. So it's Rachel again. So yes, the issue is that there is a growing number of people that are speaking languages in the United States other than English. So when I last looked at some of the census data and some other data, it was 350 all across the United States, more than that. So that number is growing rapidly. And if you look over stats over time, that has been increasing. So over 20% of the US population speaks a language other than English at home. And, there's definitely parts, I'm more familiar with New York City, but, there's definitely parts where, there are signs. I was just in East New York yesterday visiting a branch, and they had signs in Bengali. Along with English, advertising a local doctor. So you can definitely see this in parts of the United States, just that this language diversity is increasing. So if you all took Every Child Ready to Read training or early literacy training, either in library school or with some trainers, you've probably heard this message, that we really want to encourage families to use the language that they know best when they're talking and interacting with their children. And the reason for that is that often families have a really rich home language. They have a wide vocabulary. They use idiomatic phrases that are rich and juicy phrases in their own home language, and really give children a solid basis in language development when they're learning language development, building that foundation of their brain. So it's really important that families use the language that they're going to have the most rich speech in when they're speaking with their young children at home. But there is a little bit of a tension here. So we know that when families come to the United States, they often, are kind of anxious, particularly when they have children. Their English may not be that great, and they may really want their children to learn English to do well in this country, to do well in school, to make friendships with other children, to have those skills that maybe they don't have. And, here in New York, we see a lot of the branches that often the children become the translators for their parents. So often families really rely on that. But this is a bit of a tension that we have with early literacy advocates saying, like, use the language that you know best, but parents have an anxiety there and really want their kids to learn language. So I think something that we've found is just making sure that we can speak to both of those needs. encouraging families to develop that rich literacy with their children, all the while saying that, reminding them and reassuring them that their children will learn English, and that we also have resources to help with that, resources to help with their own language learning needs as parents and caregivers, as well as supporting their children. So I think those two things are in tension, but I think the library is really, really well suited to help and support families through that.
So now we're going to talk about some of our multilingual programs at the library, what that looks like at BPL, and some of the ways that we've partnered with different community organizations and other initiatives at the library, so that we can add more programming in different languages for all of those many different communities that we serve. So we launched multilingual Storytimes in 2016, and since then we've offered Storytimes in 10 different languages at 45 locations, physical locations, and then of course in 2020 we started offering them on Zoom, and also virtually via Facebook Live, which was very popular. And then in addition to our bilingual staff, which we're fortunate enough to have, we've offered them training in how to deliver multilingual story times. We also were able to hire native speakers who have either a teaching background or a library experience, and then offer them training and supplies. And we really also try to hire those people from within the communities where they're living. So for example, this is a photo of our first bilingual Quechua and Spanish story time. Well, it was actually trilingual because I think it was Quechua, Spanish, and English, which we offered first virtually and then in person with Araceli in a neighborhood that has a strong Quechua speaking community that she was very connected to, and therefore could reach out to the families that ended up coming to her story time. And then Story Teen, one of my favorite programs at the library, is an internship program for high schoolers who are interested in careers in early childhood and the library. And when we were in the hiring process, we really intentionally recruited teens who were bilingual, in some cases multilingual, and then offered them training on how to conduct bilingual story times, which they did in some of the languages you see on this list. So Arabic, Bengali, of course, English, French, Hindi, Korean, Mandarin, Punjabi, Spanish, Russian, Urdu, and Yoruba.
Well, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the virtual story times that we've done. So as you can imagine, March 2020 hit, and like everyone else, we were scrambling to try to figure out a way to serve our community. But we really found that virtual programs have a very interesting effect. Our legal team gave us the go-ahead to start with virtual programming right away. So we were a very early adopter of virtual story time. And so we were starting to do story times in other languages as well. Spanish, a lot of other staff who are not children's librarians stepped up to offer story time. We had staff offering it in Spanish, Arabic, Turkish, and one of our most popular languages, we actually have a children's librarian who is a Tibetan speaker. Tenzin is here, and she became a superstar. We had on one of her story times, I believe there was about 45,000 views of that. So total of some of her programs. So it was just kind of astounding how popular. So really these programs were going out and people are watching them, as part of the Tibetan diaspora, in India, in the UK, in Australia, and New Zealand, as well as the United States. So that was just really astounding to see. So if that's something that you can offer virtual story time, I know publishers are tightening up some of their copyright sort of restrictions around that, but it helps people in other countries. If you have staff that speak that language and can offer a virtual program, that can really reach people all over the world. And we definitely have people that are joining some of our virtual programming, and it may be a morning program, but in India it can be a bedtime program depending on where they are. And I'm sure if the time zone is quite right, but I think that's about how it works out for them. So that's that can be a lot of fun. And we've also found that virtual programming that families can sometimes, particularly if it's on Zoom, can watch together. They can, we actually have a few families that have family members in other parts of the country. In one of our Brainy Babies programs, the grandparents Zoom in from Germany with the baby that attends one of the Brainy Babies virtual sessions. So that can be a really great way to unite people, and borders can disappear. Another program that we're very excited that we've been doing is called Brainy Babies, and it's a program for children birth to age 3 and their parents and caregivers. And what we've been doing as we've been expanding the programming to other branches is partnering up our children's librarians, who are mostly English speakers, with musicians and performers who speak the language of the community. We've been partnering with a group called Urban Stages that does a lot of great community theater performance work, and they have a lot of multilingual performers, and it's been really wonderful to partner them up. So our children's librarians do the story time piece, and then the Urban Stagers performers bring music, storytelling, other language capacity that they can do, and it really becomes a wonderful community program. And we've been offering that in Arabic, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Bengali. We're going to be offering that starting in November. And, we try to offer these programs both in person and virtual. I definitely am a fan of virtual programming, but it's never going to replace in person. There's something that, bringing community members together, you just can't replace on Zoom or in other virtual platforms. But, I think there's something to be said for making both available, because we know some families, are dealing with lots of different, juggling lots of different responsibilities, and sometimes virtual can really work well for them in some cases.
Other multilingual programs that we have offered and that are a really great complement to the Storytimes that are offered for children and families are cultural programs for the entire community that celebrate traditional cultures, holidays, such as Lunar New Year or Dia de los Muertos. It can be a really great way to welcome folks into the library by celebrating alongside existing traditions. So we have a world language family series that we offer throughout the year that offers multilingual cultural programming in different neighborhoods with artists that are matched to the languages spoken in each community. We most recently started a Heritage Ambassadors program. We found that we wanted to go beyond celebrating specific holidays, that Asian American Heritage Month or Dia de los Niños there's need for Spanish cultural programming or Chinese traditional arts programming throughout the year, not just during those specific celebrations. So we're working on a project that pays traditional artists to develop programming at the library for all ages, and also offers them training on ways to connect and work with the library. One of the exciting virtual programs that really took off during the pandemic at the library is our community cooking program. We have a cookmobile that is sort of a mobile cooking station that many of you might have seen before. And that program had launched pre-pandemic to offer teen cooking programs. Once the pandemic hit, we started to look at ways that we could actually do cooking programs from home over social media. Usually we used Instagram Live. And the two librarians who run the Cookmobile program partnered with our immigrant services to offer live cooking demos from one of the librarians' kitchen, and that celebrated specific culinary traditions. And each community cooking Instagram Live highlighted a recipe that was shared either by a library staff member or by a community member. So the first Instagram Live community cooking cooked my great-grandmother's Varenikas from Ukraine and Poland, the Jewish side of my family, and I shared our recipe, and the librarian cooked it live, and people could cook along or share their own recipes and memories. And we've done those continually. We just recently did a program for Hispanic Heritage Month, but they've been a really great way to interact and celebrate other cultural traditions.
All right. Well, I also wanted to tell you about a few resources we created for our children's librarians offering story time to help make story time more visual and give some cues as to what's happening next for families that may not be English speakers. And as you were sharing some of the things that helped you when you didn't speak the language, when someone's trying to communicate something, we will help these will support families. So one thing that we created was creating visual schedules. Now, you may have heard of visual schedules as something that really work in special education classrooms or supporting children with disabilities, particularly children that are on the autism spectrum, but they can really be helpful in a lot of ways. This is one of those examples of universal design. Something that works for one group can often help everyone. So using pocket charts, if you know what a pocket chart is, those are things that teachers use for language activities and things like that, but they can be really helpful in this case. And putting cards that say what's going to happen next in the story time. So having a card for story time, finger play, another book, playtime, and these are really helpful. Because they really just say to people, okay, this is what we're doing next, and this is what's coming up. And it's really helpful for everybody so that they know what's happening and really can help. And they're a great environmental print for young children too. So a lot of these images of these cards are available. Thank you, Lauren, for putting that in the chat. There's a wiki page that we created that has a lot of these resources here that you can see in action. And these have been, and these are something that you can add to yourself. The children's librarians sometimes just use note cards to create their own if they have a specialized activity, but having like a little icon is really helpful. We also created some large format illustrated song and rhyme books, ones that could be hung up at the front of the room. They were just really large versions of classic songs and rhymes, like The Wheels on the Bus or a Hello Song or the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And what's great about these is we often find that parents that want to keep using these songs with their children, maybe they're not English speakers, or even if they are, they can take pictures of these songs and rhymes and then refer to them later. So they really work well. I often find these are better than sharing out resource sheets, especially with baby programs, because the babies just eat them. When you give all the parents, a cheat sheet, they just eat those up. So it's great to have some of these that are posted at the front of the room. It's like a giant songbook. I should have had a better picture of this, but you can see some of that, I believe, on the wiki page. And then we also created in 12 languages just a welcome to Storytime sheet. It was just some very simple tips about the goals of Storytime, how to support your child during Storytime, and just some simple, like, turn off your cell phone kind of recommendations and things like that. We printed those in 12 languages, and our staff can request them from our office, the Youth and Family Services office, or print them on demand as they need them. And then the flip side of this sheet also has some just some early literacy tips. Singing, talking, reading, writing, and playing suggestions, the simple ways you can do it in those 12 languages. So that's just been a really helpful resource. Sometimes a lot of staff, when they're doing an early literacy workshop with families, sometimes they just print out the early literacy tips on the back, but they're really great to have out in Storytime to help support people so they just know what to expect when they come to a program. So when you're building an audience, just a few questions to ask yourself. Sometimes, we've definitely had conversations with staff that saying, oh, well, I know my census data says I have a lot of folks that speak this language, but they're just not coming into the library. Well, my question I always say is, well, maybe it's time for you to build something for them to come to. Maybe it's time for you to offer a program. So sometimes if this is something that you want to offer, just thinking about ways you can really build the audience and connect with the community. Sometimes asking some stakeholders in your community, childcare programs that serve that language group, community groups, immigrant service organizations, even local churches or other houses of worship that support that group. It's a great way to get some feedback about when you can offer some programs. So when are your families able to come to the library? It's very interesting at our Sunset Park Library. I always find it very interesting. A lot of the Spanish-speaking families come during the week, and a lot of the Asian families come on the weekend. So just sort of knowing when the families are usually going to be at your location is really great, and thinking about offering programming when you can. Offer consistent programs if possible. I can't say this enough, that we really found that if you can offer, an extended series or an ongoing program, that's really wonderful. Sometimes we can't do that just because of funding needs, but if you can do that, that's a really best way to build an audience. We've also found that word of mouth is the best way to attract families. Just making sure, because often, a lot of families that speak the same language, are tightly bound to each other in many communities, and they will spread the word if there's a great program going on at the local library. And then also find out which social media platforms or which ways of communication are preferred. WhatsApp is really popular with a lot of different groups. Maybe some groups really prefer Facebook or Instagram. Finding out which way they get their information is always really helpful, because it does vary from group to group. And if you can, try scheduling some concurrent programs for families. Maybe if you're doing an English conversation group, maybe schedule that before or after a story time. I know before the pandemic, our Cypress Hills Library had a lot of Bengali speaking mothers that were coming to the library for the English conversation groups. And so we decided to schedule a story time right after. And, while the families were there having their English conversation group, the kids would play, and then they would have a story time for everybody. And that was a really wonderful way to support and serve the community.
For getting the word out, I definitely second what Rachel said about word of mouth being one of the best ways to spread the word about multilingual programming. Some of the other ways that we build an audience for many of our multilingual programs is through community partnerships with local organizations that serve immigrant communities, as well as personal invitations. Don't underestimate what the impact of directly inviting people to a program. In some cultures, a flyer is not enough of an invitation. There's something special about having a personal invitation where somebody approaches you and invites you to the program. We work a lot with our ethnic media, so ethnic media broadly being different kinds of radio or local newspapers that are in different languages and are distributed locally. We place ads in different newspapers, and also have placed ads on local radio. Depends on each community sort of how multilingual media is consumed. For example, in the Haitian immigrant community in Brooklyn, we found that radio was a much better way to reach people. Several of the Russian-speaking librarians told us that only old people read the newspaper. So there's different ways to sort of find that out, either through talking with your multilingual staff or reaching out to community partners to get a sense of which type of media is the best way to spread the word. In general, our overall approach with language access is to print flyers in multiple languages, whether it be for a cultural program, or on our website, making sure that our website is accessible and it's easy to translate content about the library on our website. We have signage that we created. This is one example of posters that we put across the library as part of the Everyone is Welcome Here campaign. And a lot of our cultural programming also used that tag phrase, Everyone is Welcome Here. We created buttons for each language that staff could wear that said in a language spoken by the community, everyone is welcome here. So there are different ways, some more intensive and some more simple, that the library can be welcoming to audiences. one thing is inviting people, connecting with partners, but once people walk through the doors, you want to make sure that the library itself is welcoming and that language isn't seen as a barrier but as an asset. And in general, cultural celebrations are a great way to sort of marry all of these different ways of conducting outreach, and can be sort of the initial encounter that people have with the library, and are able then to connect with a whole host of resources, whether it's ESOL programming or multilingual story times.
So a lot of what we have shared so far obviously takes some planning and of course resources. So we also wanted to share some simple things that you can hopefully do and implement right away. And these are three of the different programming approaches that we have tried. And bilingual story time, we've talked about that already a little bit with a native speaker, is really wonderful. It's what we did in our multilingual story times, but it's not always possible if you don't have folks in your community that speak that language, or you don't have the resources to hire people to lead those story times. So I'm going to talk about these two other ways that you can make your story times more welcoming to English language learners. And I'll provide a few examples and resources that you can put into practice. But as was mentioned, and Lauren put the link in the chat, a lot of the resources that I'm going to be mentioning are in the wiki that we created. So adding multilingual content to your story time is different from bilingual story time. We see this as a way, you know, as Eva was saying, to engage families that speak different languages, but also to expose others in your community to new languages and cultures. We found that we had a Japanese story time at our central library, and it was about 60% non-Japanese speakers and about 40% Japanese speakers, just because those families were really curious and interested and wanted to expose their children to another culture and another language. You can do this with songs and rhymes and using books and through talking and playing and all the amazing things that you already do in story time. So I'm going to give you a few examples of each. And again, everything I'm showing you is in the wiki. So some of the ways that you can add multilingual story time, you can simply sing the hello and goodbye song in different languages. Or if that's too intimidating, just learning how to say hello and goodbye in different languages. One favorite tip that I learned from Shamsa, who's in this picture, who is our Urdu Storytime leader, is adding words in another language to a song or rhyme. And I'm going to put a video which you can watch later. Oh yeah, it's already in there. Thank you, Lauren. This is Shamsa singing The Wheels on the Bus, and she's singing the song in English, but she has translated just the movement words into Urdu. So that's something you can do with a lot of simple songs, especially repetitive songs. You can show a video of a song or rhyme in another language, and we've shared some great resources for that with really simple, great story time songs that are in, I think, up to 14 different languages. And then you can also ask a parent or a caregiver to share a song or rhyme in their language. This is something we tried in our Brainy Babies program during sort of like a show and tell time, where families were asked to share a book or a song, and some of them did it in their native language. If you are really feeling brave, you can learn very simple songs or rhymes or finger plays in other languages and share those yourself. A way that you can do that with books, you know, reading a monolingual book in another language is a big challenge. I don't know if anyone has tried it, and it's not really recommended unless you're truly bilingual. And that would mean, you know, being truly bilingual means like you could have a whole conversation in that language. You really shouldn't try to read a book in another language unless you're bilingual. But there are some easy ways to use books to infuse other languages in your story time. One of my favorite ways to do this is by using wordless books. This is also a really great thing to model for parents, that if they speak another language, they can check out a wordless book or a near wordless book and easily translated into their own language. One of the books I love doing this with is Wait by Antoinette Portis, a near wordless book. It only has, I think, 2 or 3 words in the whole book. And I use these little Post-its. I've translated wait and hurry, I think, into 8 languages. And so every page we read those words in a different language. And then I've asked people in the story time to add their own translations to the book. And that's something, again, that's really great to model. Another thing you can do is read a very simple bilingual book. I should have put simple on this slide. So an example of that is for example, Say Hello by Rachel Isadora. So the only word that is in different languages in that book is the word hello. So that's one that you can definitely share. And there are others that are simple enough or that have the text in both languages. Sharing a counting book or an ABC book or a book about colors, any of these kind of concept books where you can very easily, count to 10 in another language, sing the ABC song. I learned to sing the ABC song in Russian. It was really challenging, but very fun. And a parent taught me how to do it. And so that's something you can do. And also that's an easy thing to invite even children and parents and caregivers in your story times to do. All right, and my favorite thing to do in story time, play and talk. So as you're encouraging talking and playing, these are just a few ideas to infuse other languages in your story time. I really love, they have ABC blocks in multiple languages, so that's great for play, which Eva's adorable daughter many years ago is doing in this picture. And it's also great for doing craft projects. You can stamp these into clay and to model magic for more of a sensory experience with the different alphabets. Again, counting to 10, playing world music, CDs and musical instruments. And then, of course, if you have a play area, using bilingual labels for the toys and the different play materials that you have. So now we're going to talk about another approach. So that was adding multilingual content to your story time. Now this is making your English story times more accessible to English language learners. So this really means finding ways they can understand the songs and the stories and the tips that you're sharing. And Rachel shared some of the resources that we created for that. And here are some other ideas. So you can model wordless books. So that really, again, shows parents that they can read a picture book in every language, in any language. You can use visuals. You can, oop, I'm on the wrong slide. Whoops. Did I go too far ahead? Oh, here we go. Okay. So you can model using wordless books. You can use props like puppets and flannel boards, which Mariella is doing here. She's doing a story time in English, but she's also doing teaching some Spanish words and making sure people understand the Wheels on the Bus song by using a prop. Reading big books is a great way to make books more accessible. And then, of course, using expression and choosing books with expressive characters. Providing song and rhyme lyrics. As Rachel said, it's great if you can have them up at the front of the room so that everybody can sing along, and then using visuals and prompts. Oh, and thank you, Rachel, for sharing the Uncle Goose blocks. They come in multiple languages. So just something to think about for all of your story times when you're sitting down to plan your programs with all of these new ideas. It's really good to keep in mind these 3 things. And universal design you may have heard about because it's something we talk about when we're designing programs and curriculum for children with disabilities, but it really applies to making story time more accessible for everybody. So you want to show things in different ways. So an example of that is, telling a story using both a book and some props or visuals. And then you want to allow people to show what they know in different ways. So an example of that is inviting families to share songs, stories, words, or the ABC song in their language. And you want to give them different ways to participate. So not only by listening, because if they're listening and not understanding, then they're not really able to participate, but try to engage them visually try to engage them through dance, through movement, through song, and of course play, which is pretty universal.
Another way to make sure that programs are accessible beyond bilingual programming is to use plain language. And plain language is an entire approach that's actually, there's a whole website, government website dedicated to plain language. It's a movement that was created to make government documents more accessible, but has also been adopted by many different institutions to make sure that basic documents and instructions are able to be comprehended by people regardless of their education level and regardless of their English level. So I definitely recommend looking at some of the government websites that have guidance on plain language, but some of the key sort of rules or things to consider are the amount of language that's used. So think about the words that you use. If there's a simpler way to say the same thing, using active voice. I find that often ESOL dictionaries are a great way to find a simpler word for a flyer or for instructions on how to access the computers. Be aware of how long your sentences are, and in-person programming, it's always good to restate and check for understanding. So these are things that we use. They come from best practices also that have been defined in the plain language movement, and they also come from best practices of English language instruction. In our immigrant services, we have multiple folks, including myself, who've taught English to adults. And we find that restating and checking for understanding is incredibly important. Sometimes people don't like simplifying their flyers. They like the beautiful words that they've used, but just think about it as the initial invitation, that it can be really helpful for everyone to be able to read your promotional materials. We also utilize community experts. We have a volunteer language bank of multilingual librarians who have volunteered to translate flyers, shorter flyers, and also to advise the library on ways to make different parts of the library, from collections to our kiosks where people pay fine, or where people pay for printing, to make those things easier and better translated. So we work with bilingual staff. We also work with community members and even families in our programs to refine our pronunciation, to make sure that our translations are accurate, and to get recommendations for songs and rhymes. I definitely, again, going back to this same sort of guiding principle of seeing someone speaking another language or not speaking English, not as a barrier, but as a resource. I definitely encourage you to reach out to both your staff and local communities for ideas and content.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, the resources are on the wiki that was posted in the chat. And I believe there's the slides are also available through the conference portal and everything like that. So, definitely have access to all of these resources that we shared. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. We now have a few more minutes, so we could take a few questions. I think we're just about at time, but if there's some burning questions, we'd be happy to answer them. I think you can, maybe Lauren can chime in. I think there's a way to raise your hand, or if you'd like to put that in the chat.
Yeah, I think
it does in the chat, please, I was told. Okay.
Yeah, chat those in would be great. I have a question. Keeping in mind that I am outside of your field, I don't do children's services, but the concept that really fascinated me was the cookmobile, because Kentucky has the most bookmobiles per capita. We're really big on outreach services, because we have so many rural areas. And I was just wondering, for libraries that may want to replicate that, you talked about partnering with another agency, but are there any issues you had to deal with in regards to liability or certifications for food safety, anything along those lines? Oh, there's a link. I love it.
I put the link in. Yes, everybody had to get food handler certification who was involved in the program. We also worked with some local organizations that focused on food access. So we've done cooking programs in a lot of different ways now. We've worked even with this organization called City Harvest that where people can even pick up groceries and cook from home alongside us. It really depends on your audience. But just so you know, the Cookmobile is not actually a vehicle on wheels. It's more like a huge kitchen cart that can be very difficult to move around. So that's one challenge. But we've also adopted some work that Philadelphia Free Library did around cooking. They have a beautiful kitchen, but they created like a kitchen in a box to be able to use in programs in different branches, so that you don't have to move these huge cookmobiles that are like kitchens on wheels around. I mean, it has a sink, it has all kinds of amazing things. But it's great for outdoor programming. It's great if you have a way to transport them.
That's excellent. I like anything with wheels. If it's a book truck or a bookmobile, I like it. I'm very simple that way. See that Mary has.
Well, then you should be doing toddler story time. You'll fit right in. So.
Yeah, sometimes when, working on tech stuff, working on invoicing, I'm like, yeah, I just want to go read a book to kids right now, perhaps in another life. So we have a great comment from Mary Landrum. She says, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. The advice about making Storytime ELL friendly is especially useful. I am not bilingual in any of my community target languages. This approach would be so practical. I'm fluent in French, sometimes use it with Congolese patrons, but almost never with children.
Well, and I'll just say that, I think that's wonderful. And even if you speak another language that maybe is not common in your community, just sharing that, I think, is really useful. And just saying that other languages are welcome here. And that may make people that speak another language want to share that, and then just open that up for people that maybe can take pride in sharing their own language and heritage, I think is really wonderful. So don't let that stop you. I think it's wonderful to share whatever you know, and kids really enjoy it.
All right, folks, any more questions or comments before we end the session? So we do have a couple more minutes where we can take some questions.
While you're all thinking about those questions, I know we're almost at time, but I did want to share one song that is incredibly fun to do in Storytime. I've also done it in rooms full of adults. But this is a really easy way to infuse a lot of different languages, because as you can see by this list, you just add the goodbye word in different languages to the song. And I would really recommend utilizing community experts, or if you don't have any community experts that can help you with pronunciation, there's always YouTube and ways to check that online. So I actually checked with my community expert, which is my neighbor who speaks Mandarin. And the correct way to say this is zaijian. So I know that Zoom sing-alongs we learned in the pandemic, they don't really work. So I'll just demo it for you. This is sung to Skip to Malou. So you go, clap everybody and say zaijian, clap everybody and say zaijian, clap everybody and say zaijian, no matter what the weather. And then you can do it for French. Clap everybody and say au revoir, clap everybody and say au revoir, clap everybody and say au revoir, no matter what the weather. I'm not going to do the whole list, but thank you so much for listening to my singing, and I hope it has inspired you.
Jessica, that was great. It's like we had a little tiny desk, concert to listen to. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, and Christy says, this has inspired me to use French during story time. I can count to 10. All right, excellent. So thank you very much to Jessica and Eva and Rachel for your time and your expertise. This was really interesting. I'm sure we're going to have folks diving into the resources you shared. So we'll go ahead and end the recording, but we hope folks stick around for sessions all throughout the day through 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you. Enjoy your conference.